Welcome to the Show Don't Tell Writing Podcast with me, Suzy Vidori, where I peel back the layers of how to wow your readers with your fiction, your nonfiction. Anybody can bang out a first draft, but it takes a little more work to make your book as amazing as it can be. Join me as I share the step-by-step writing techniques you could apply to your writing right away, as I host successful writers who share a behind-the-scenes look at their own writing lives, and as I live coach writers on their pages, giving practical writing examples that will make your own writing stronger. Nobody is born knowing how to write an engaging book. There are real and important skills that you need to learn. On this show, I cut through the noise and get you all the info you need. I can't wait to see how this information is going to transform your writing. Fasten your seatbelts, listeners, because today we have Ian Page coming on the podcast to talk about writing with humor. I first met Ian several years ago when I developmentally edited his debut novel, which has just come out, The Naked Ambition. It was really fun to work with Ian because he has so many opinions and so much to say, and to work on the tone of his humor, to work on the sarcasm, to work on the political bent that he wanted to convey. We're going to talk about all of that today on the podcast, so listen up. If you've ever considered writing with humor, wondering how to do it, wondering if you're doing it well, wondering why you'd want to do it, we're going to answer all of that today. Ian Page draws on decades of professional geophysics in the oil patch for his debut novel, The Naked Ambition. Ian gained his BSc in geophysics from the University of Alberta, never to set foot in the halls of academia again. At various times, he's been a wretched musician, an unreliable soldier, and a failed treasure hunter. Ian is a native of Halifax, Nova Scotia, and currently resides in the Okanagan Valley of British Columbia with his wife, where he spends ridiculous amounts of time playing hockey, golfing, walking, and goofing off, much to the annoyance of his publisher. As you can tell from the bio that he submitted, Ian is absolutely hilarious, and I can't wait for you to hear this episode. Welcome to the podcast, Ian. So awesome to talk to you now that your book is out.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate being here.
So book one is what we're going to be talking about, although you can share snippets from the next couple of books that you're writing as well. The Naked Ambition, a field manual novel by Ian Page. What's the field manual novel, by the way?
That is probably an older term for some people. Field manual, there's a quasi-military aspect to that term. So when I wrote The Naked Ambition, that was intended as a standalone. And then somewhere along the line, I got the idea for a couple of sequels. And so I needed something to, if you forgive the expression, a brand for the trilogy. And that's what I came up with.
Yeah, I love it. And I think, having read them, I think it's really appropriate. I think it's also tongue in cheek. We're here to talk about the humor in the books today. The tagline that is on the back of the book is power, prestige, and complete nonsense. Welcome to corporate warfare in the oil patch. What was it that you set? It's so intriguing. I just love your sense of humor. What exactly did you set out to write when you first started?
Well, the central problem was I had the character before I had a plot, and I had a bunch of misfires with that character. So the main character starred as Chesterfield. He's just all too comfortable, as the name implies. And I wanted
just 1 second, because it doesn't come across necessarily on the podcast. So I want to pause for a minute and point it out. His name is Chesterfield, as in a sofa, right? Like everything in this book is amazingly well thought out. So keep going. I just wanted to not miss that point.
Okay,
he's too comfortable.
So yeah, he's all too comfortable, and I want to put him in situations where he's forced to unravel a bit. And the first few tries I had with the character didn't seem to really go anywhere. The stakes weren't high enough, or it was just a little too languid. And then probably about 7 years into the character's life, one of my colleagues at work said, well, you're in the oil patch. Why don't you write an oil patch story? And okay, well, now we're starting to think a little more clearly and pointedly. And then the plot came along where I thought, all right, what would make a comfortable executive engineer uncomfortable? threaten his job, bring in a romantic interest that he really has no interest in, but all of a sudden really wants to be interested in, and then put a couple other layers on there, and that's where the family dynamics came up. So primarily, it's, write what you know about. Sure, that made a lot of sense, and that's where things really started cooking.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, it's really hard because sometimes writers come to me, and this was one of those cases where the character, you literally want to show that he's comfortable and complacent. And that's a tough place for a main character to be. And so we had to work on, well, what does he want? And all those things that people say, oh, Suzy, you're a broken record. You keep asking the same questions. But it's tough because you've got this character in mind, but for a book to work and for the whole arc to work, he has to kind of have some agency, right? And be working on things that, which he does in this book now, but that was tough because you were bringing him kind of from being complacent into being more active.
Yeah, that's probably if I'm being honest, the weakest part of Chester is as a starting point, things are all too easy for him. And so thematically, what I was looking for was the third certainty in life. So, we joke about death and taxes are the two certainties. The third uncertainty is, or third certainty, sorry, is you don't get through life unscathed. You're going to get pushed about, you're going to get nicked, and so on. So the first book is really an exploration of that alongside of the plot action. So the plot action, we'll call that the A story. There's a crisis at work, and he's got to deal with it. And he's got competition, so he's got to deal with rivals. He's got a love interest that baffles him. He's got to deal with that. He's got family dynamics who all of a sudden pop up and interfere in his life, which he absolutely loathes. He hates it. And so all these things were intended to kind of come crashing down on him. And does he get through it?
Yeah. Okay. So you set out to write this story about Chesterfield because he's just hilarious, right? And also complacent. And how did that evolve? So you got, then the plot came together when you kind of wrapped into the oil field and you tried to make the stakes higher, and you did a good job, not tried to, you did it. And how did that all evolve? What changed about your original idea about what you set out to write?
Part of
Did
it
it stay
is,
the same?
I'd say part of it is the number of characters. It's an ensemble cast. And with a certain amount of thought about, the different parts of my own experiences, one of the advantages perhaps I have is I'm old. So I've got all this experience, I've got all this knowledge, which is supposed to equal wisdom. And so that's a natural advantage for someone who sets out to write something like this. And then bringing in all these different characters that he deals with. Most of them he deals with just fine. They're his pals or his dinner club friends. So it's taking a lot of slice of life things and surrounding him with that. But then he's got the dynamics of what are his weaknesses. He hates arrogance, and he's baffled by he can't deal with it. And so it's a natural conflict for him. So that was one thing. The family dynamics, mother and motherish, kind of the yin and yang of his.
Yeah. So explain that for a moment, just like we stopped and made a point about Chesterfield, mother and mother-ish, right? Like, explain that.
So mother is straightforward enough. That's his local mother. He's got kind of a teeter-totter of chumminess and restraint in dealing with her. She's a powerful woman in her own way and very demanding on his time. And he's not very good at dealing with that. And her health is is declining. And he's trying to manage that while he's managing all these other things, all these other crises that have just bloomed like dandelions. So motherish is a stepmother. And what I call his biologic father is Rodney, he's alluded to in this first book, but he pops up in the next two in a more substantial way. That's his third marriage. And of course, it falls apart very quickly. But mother stays in Chester's orbit, or more properly, the other way around. And of course, he's forced to kind of do her bidding from time to time because she wants to be a power wheel in the local town. And these kinds of dynamics, these kinds of conflicts are complicating for him. And these are part of the unraveling, the scathing issues that, where he's singed, he's tattooed, and he's basically pasted about.
Yeah, your characters are part of we're gonna get to the humor part in a second, but your characters alone and their names and everything and all their personalities is part of the fun for you, I think, in just working with you. It was part of what you most were interested in developing, and, you had lots and lots of characters to bring to the table. Who was your favorite?
Ha, ha, ha. Um,
Who was the most fun to write?
the most fun to write, there's probably a few. I think anytime I get Chester and Mothers together, sparks fly. There's a lot of witticisms and snarking back and forth. And so I think dialogue is probably one of my greater strengths, and the characters allow for a lot of fun back and forth. So I'd say sometimes it's more the dynamics between two characters rather than a favorite character. If there's one that intrigues me more than the others over the three books, it might be the Sergeant Major. And I'll stop here just to say that I've met all these characters. Again, one of the advantages of age is that you run across a lot of people on your journey, and I remember them all, fortunately and unfortunately. And I met the Sergeant Major, the character, for all of about 15 minutes when I was in the Army. And I got in a little bit of trouble. I was brought up on charges. I had rust on my rifle. And so they were going to take me to a kangaroo court. And so I arrived in a room. There's all these guys sitting around. One guy, he had forgotten to get his hair cut that 1 week. And so he was charged, and he had to pay a fine of $105 for that. So
To cover a haircut. That's why you didn't save anything by not getting a haircut.
you had to have a fresh haircut every week. And this was in basic training. So when I was in this room, a Sergeant Major pops out, and he was a ramrod straight, no nonsense kind of character, very gruff and very flipped in his manner, just like the fellow in the book. And he marched me into the colonel, and there's my captain thinking on me. And 5 minutes later, I'm out the door with a fine of $89 for having rust on my rifle.
Wow. Yeah, right way kind of. And the funny thing is we could put all these people I do the same thing. I put people into my books. By the time they evolve, I mean, he's in 3 books now. He's changed and grown and all the things. They don't recognize themselves. I'm sure if that man, I don't know if you know his name, but even if he read your book, he would have no idea. Maybe you just gave enough detail on this podcast, but I'm sure other people have gotten fines for having rust on their rifle.
These characters are they start as an embryo, and that's where the tinge of the tint of reality is formed. After that, once you get them into the situations in your writing, they do evolve, or you'd like to think that they do evolve. They have their own arcs, they have their own attitudes, and they start to spark some sort of sense of originality. So I could say that Mother and Motherish are really one person from reality, and I simply split them. One wanted to always play with the big boys and the power games, and the other was just someone who complained, and someone who was not interested in participating in life in the same way that the other one did. So we meet lots of people in our life who have kind of almost this schizophrenic aspect to them. They have one side that really is driving hard towards things, and then they have another side where it's just leave me alone.
Yeah, no, I can get that. And for all the writers out there listening to the podcast today, I'm sure that you're putting people into your writing. It happens because we can write through our own lens in some respects, and that's what gives it authenticity. That's what gives it your perspective, everything. Okay, so when you set out to write this, what was the feeling that you wanted to invoke in readers? I actually don't know the answer to this. I was excited to ask you the question. What were you hoping for?
My original point of origin thought was, I want to write a great beach novel, something that people can, sit in the hammock with whatever their favorite drink is and just flip pages on a vacation. So my aspirations were pretty limited. I wasn't trying to write the great Canadian novel or great world classic. I don't look like Dumas.
All right. But was humor always at the forefront of what you wanted?
I think so. And really the origin for that is when I was playing on a beer league hockey team in Calgary, we got into a situation where there was all kinds of strange incidents on the ice during the season. And I said to my captain, we should write about this. Let's just put together a little comic book and some player profiles and just amuse ourselves. And so we would collect all the stories at the end of each season, and we put it out. We called it the media guide and coloring book. And so I would write all the stories. I would write all the player profiles, and this went on for 11 seasons. So it became kind of the training grounds for the satirical voice, the edgy humor, and of course, being, the uber masculine, rebellious types that we were in hockey. I mean, you can imagine the crassness in all of that. But the funniest thing to me about doing all of that was at the end of the year, we'd have a wind-up golf tournament. All the guys would show up, and they got used to the idea that, oh, the media guy's here, and they couldn't wait. And then we'd hand them out, and they start flipping the pages, and they're laughing. They're laughing out loud.
Are they trying to find themselves?
Their jokes are landing. And then they get to their own player profile, and the laughing stopped. And and my captain and I, we just look at one another. What is going on here? And we had one fellow who was probably the closest thing to a non-evil Hugh Rectum, who was one of the characters in The Naked Ambition, a rather arrogant prick.
I'm going to pause again. Hugh Rectum.
Yeah.
Hugh Rectum, right? Yeah, these characters are amazing. Sorry, I just want to give you credit.
And the idea behind a lot of the character names was just to give you a quick shorthand, because there were just so many characters. So you immediately are reminded until you reach a point where, oh yeah, I know who that is, rather than trying to come up with some Hollywood great hero name or whatever, a great female name or something. Anyway, the most narcissistic character we had on our hockey team, he was the only one who laughed at himself. And I found that fascinating. And he's an interesting guy. He's become a recluse now, but he was a bright executive, had a gambling problem. He was just a really interesting guy with all these bizarre frailties, but he always had the best suits. He always smelled the best. And he always looked the best. He's the only guy who brought a hairdryer to the dressing room.
Oh my goodness.
So
that's unheard of.
These are the characters and these are the situations, and that 11 years probably provided more training ground than any creative writing classes I could take. And I did take.
Yeah, I mean, that honed your humor. You got real-time reactions from the people that you were writing about or you knew.
And,
I mean, that's like amazing.
And that's an advantage. Yeah. We talk about, or we read about actors and what do you prefer, film, TV, or stage? And the general answer usually is, I like the stage. Why?
Yeah.
Because they get the immediate response. They know if they're hitting it. Right?
Yeah. And you can adjust. And you can adjust and you can pause. And that's the thing. I mean, writing humor is tricky. And I wanted to talk about that specifically on this podcast because you're so good at it. But at the same time, even when we're working through things, it's important to get that feedback because on the page, the writing, sarcasm in particular, is very difficult to convey in writing without kind of calling out, he said sarcastically or something, right? Like you almost have to say it because you don't have the advantages that we have in life, which are timing and intonation and pause for effect and sort of that emphasis, right? Like we don't have any of those tools.
That's right. And the obvious example is when you get an email answer to something you've said, and it doesn't even have to be sarcasm, and you're looking at their response. They must have misunderstood me. That's not what I wrote.
Yeah. And then you reread your email and you're like, oh, I could see.
Yeah. And the Twitter wars or, social media, backlash or something like that. You get those kinds of problems because a misunderstanding or misdirection, sometimes on purpose, can be great fuel for humor, for sarcasm. But from the point of view of the reader trying to grasp all of that, you have to have some sort of obvious signpost or a series of signposts for the characters. So one of the things you pointed out when you went through my first book as an editor was, I get it, but it has to be more on the page. It has to be, there has to be elements there so the reader can go, aha. And then either enjoy the book.
Sometimes I have to read things 2 or 3 times because I'm like, oh, what? And then I'm like, oh, I get it. But readers aren't necessarily going to take that time. I have to as an editor. But you're right, and I can point out those places where it didn't land quite right,
That's right.
because you want them to be able to digest it the first time. And sometimes we need to be incredibly obvious, even though it feels like if this is how you and your hockey team talk all the time, it may make sense. When you read it to yourself, you've got to know that it's going to land the way that it's going to land, or it either won't make sense, it might offend somebody, it might, like lots of different things can happen. Humor is often based in insults and in inside jokes and things. And like you said, the comics that you used to do, the people loved everybody else's. They didn't so much like it about themselves, right?
No,
Um,
no, we holding up a mirror to ourselves is fraught with problems. I think from a humor perspective, you have to recognize that even within your own cultural group, call it your dinner club gals or your golfing buddies, or well, it could be any number of combinations. It could be mixed company. There's usually a shorthand that gets developed over time, and you can exploit that shorthand with your own jokes amongst your friends. But none of those jokes would make any sense to an outside party who is just not hung around with you.
yeah.
So that problem amplifies once you get into writing for a broader audience. And in the first time through, I recognized that there were a number of jokes and a number of things that I was writing about that, they seemed absurd. My mind is basically a tilt-a-whirl of an endless engine of observations. I've probably left thousands of jokes in my head on the cutting room floor, mostly because I can't remember them all, but partly because, well, that doesn't make sense to
Yeah, or
a
or
reader.
how do you walk them through? And so part of the trick, and you've done a good job of this in this and the subsequent novels that you're still working to release. With a giant cast of characters, what you need to do is bring the reader along on those inside jokes and make them part of the gang so that they can see where the joke developed, and then when it's used later they understand it, right? So it's kind of like one of those things when you're writing humor that you need to have the setup and you need to bring that reader along that you don't always think you need to do. It's kind of like world building or magic or all the things that people throw in as another element that we have to teach the reader along the way. Your job is to actually teach them how to interpret the humor so that in that moment when you need them to really get it, it works, right? So there's work to be done to trace that or to thread that through. And I think you
And,
did a really
and,
good
you-
job.
and you're probably going to have to make a decision. If you decide that you want to write something humorous, you're going to have to just decide what the warmth level is. So think of it as a light bulb. You can go into Home Depot or Canadian Tire these days, and you can get the cool white, or you can get the warm, warmish light that's what people used to call incandescent light. And you have to decide how warm you want to be. And the problem that I've faced in writing, especially the subsequent books, now the universe is kind of established, how consistent can I keep that warmth level? Do I want to get into the shock humor on the cool side, or do I want to be something more warm and witty like a Woodhouseian kind of writer would? The problem for humor is keeping that tone consistent so that the readers aren't enjoying, and all of a sudden they get slapped.
Yeah.
And they go, "Oh, where'd that come from?" That's really kind
Which
of
is
scary.
something you can do in real life, or you could do as a comedian on the stage. You could have sweet humor all the way along and then slap your audience and it'd be a shock and you could wait while they recover. You're there to coddle them when they're reading your book. So you're right. You kind of have to set the tone. It also might
Yeah,
attract a
and
different
then that
reader.
that creates a second problem, and that is the difference between landing the joke in the present tense of the situation that the characters are in, and throwing a little, not really a breadcrumb, but a little bit of foreshadowing. So in the second book called Patron Games, which is a theatrical farce, the plot lines, there's several that collide, detonate, and create lots of fun disaster at the end. They need a lot of foreshadowing. So there's a long buildup. The architecture of how that got put together was different than the Naked Ambition, which is more of a straightforward intrigue. You know what the end is going to be. That's the ticking clock.
Thanks for tuning in to the Show Don't Tell Writing podcast with me, Suzy Vidori. It is my absolute honor to bring you the straight goods for that book you're writing or the book that you're planning to write. Please help me keep the podcast going by helping people find us. You can subscribe to the podcast and leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you're listening to show how much you enjoy the show. That's how other listeners will find us. Also, visit suzyvidori.com/newsletter to hop on my weekly inspired writing newsletter list, where you'll stay inspired and be the first to know about all the upcoming training events and writing courses that happen in my community. Want my eyes on your writing? Submit a page of your current draft for a chance to come on the podcast at the link in the show notes. I'd love to chat with you about your writing in my always positive, incredibly supportive way, so that you can make great strides towards your writing goals. I'm here to cheer you on. Remember, that book you're writing is going to open doors that you haven't even thought of yet, and I can't wait to help you make that it the absolute best it can be. See you again right here next week. Hi, writer. Want my support to get your book finished and out into the world? Join my Inner Circle membership, a community of supportive writers where each month we set goals, share pages, learn new techniques, and get you unstuck fast so that you can make continuous progress on your writing goals. Coached Writers Finish. And you can get me as your virtual book coach in this group program for only $199 a month, much less than a single one-on-one coaching session. Check out the details at suzyvidori.com/inner circle. We have live events happening all the time, so grab your spot now to join us.